You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, today I'd like to do what I call three things in a rabbit hole. Three tools that we both use a lot and that are not PowerPoint because, of course, we're in the presentation business. So people just assume that one of our top three tools is going to be PowerPoint. So let's take that out of there.
Okay.
So these are three tools that are not PowerPoint. And then, of course, since this is called the White Rabbit podcast, we've got to throw a white rabbit in there or a rabbit hole in there. So,
of course.
Yeah, so a huge time waster. Something, for example, something that I'm fascinated by, but is a huge time waster for me. So that's what we're going to do today. Three things in a rabbit hole. And should I go first, or do you want to go first?
Yeah, you should go first because when you shared the email with me for today's topic, I was pretty excited to read it, and I'm really curious about your points of view.
Okay. So these are Matt's three things in a rabbit hole. The first thing, I made a list of what are the three tools that I use the most. In fact, I probably use all three of these tools more than I use PowerPoint. So it's not just excluding PowerPoint. It's like even if there was PowerPoint in there, these are still three tools that Matt uses the most. And surprisingly, I was surprised by this too. But surprisingly, the first one on that list, the tool that I spend the most time with is Netflix. And when you hear the name Netflix,
okay, tell me more.
Because Netflix surprised me, and it would surprise everyone else. Because to say that you spend the most time with Netflix is like saying that I spend the most time sitting on the couch eating potato chips and watching TV.
That's the first image, yes. So yeah,
that's the first image that I came up with Netflix. But actually, no, in real life, that's not how Matt is using Netflix. So shall I go into why Netflix made the top three tools that Matt uses?
I think, yes, we would better clarify that.
Okay, here we go. The reason that Netflix is such a useful tool for me is that my business is basically about helping people tell stories about what they're doing. And of course, Netflix is the world's current number one repository of stories. And there are a couple things that I do with Netflix, and it's easy to turn Netflix into a rabbit hole that you just spend like 24 hours a day on. So I limit myself to an hour or less of Netflix per day. And one thing that I like about Netflix is that I watch a lot of different shows, and I ask myself, do all of these shows fit into what I call, or not what I call, what I borrow this term from somebody else, man in whole. And we've talked about man in whole is a story structure, and I'll go into what that is in a second. But you and I have talked on this podcast before about Boy Meets Girl, right? Boy Meets Girl, that story structure, yes. Boy Meets Girl, that story structure is basically man in whole. And there's a little sugar and a little more romance, but it's basically man in whole. And man in whole is just, it's like an extremely simple story structure, which is basically man or woman gets into a hole, and then the story is how does that man get out of the hole? And that's one thing that I like about Netflix, because Netflix gives you, an unlimited supply of TV shows that you can watch, TV shows and movies. And so you can watch a few of them and ask yourself, does this story fit into the man in whole structure? and they all do. One thing I found, even a British spy thriller and a show about high school cheerleaders are all basically going to fit into the same man in whole structure. And so with Netflix, you can see the structure. When you have a moment where you're asking yourself, am I using the right tool for work? This man in whole structure. Am I using the right structure for work? And Netflix is a reminder that yes, this is the most common story structure, man in whole. And another thing I like about Netflix is that it shows you, if there are, let's say, 11 million shows on Netflix, it shows you 11 million variations of man in whole. So when you're taking man in whole and you're trying to apply it to something like, in my line of work, getting budget approval for a software project. And if you want to structure that request for budget approval into man in whole, Netflix will remind you that yes, this story structure, man in whole, can be used for that too. So those are a couple things that I like about Netflix. One is that Netflix is a great reminder that pretty much every story in the world seems to fall into the structure of man in whole. And
yes,
so and there are a million ways to make that story interesting. So if somebody comes to you and says, my story is so boring, there's nothing interesting about this, you know that after you talk to this person for an hour, you're going to draw out the details that suddenly make this a dramatic story. Even if it's just about getting budget approval for software, you can turn that into a story that somebody would be interested in. So that's one of my tools, is Netflix. And yes, in order to avoid wasting 24 hours a day watching Netflix, I try to limit myself to an hour a day or less. So that's tool number one.
Yes. In no way we're advocating spending our days in front of the TV. But when I was listening to you, I also realized there are a couple of lines that I use in my trainings or my client meetings, and most of them are from Netflix, actually. I mean, my favorite line was, you cannot get from a no to a yes without some maybes in between. I mean, for me, this is a fantastic line. And I borrow it from Frank Underwood. And I thank the people behind that phrase who spent maybe weeks or months or even years to come up with those words, which are very impactful. So God bless Netflix and the people behind it.
Yes, God bless Netflix. Okay, so tool number two, or thing number two, is Grammarly. And you might say, Matt, you're a native English speaker and you've written a few books. Why on earth would you need Grammarly? And I use Grammarly a lot, and I recommend it to pretty much everybody. And I use the free account. If I line up 100 users of Grammarly, 99 of them are going to be on the free account. One of them will be on the paid account and be thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't be paying for this. I have no idea how Grammarly makes any money at all. Everybody seems to be on the free account. But I use Grammarly because I do a lot of writing for other people. And of course, especially since it's for other people, since it's for clients, I want it to look clean. I don't want to have spelling errors. I don't want to have grammar errors. And so Grammarly helps me a lot with that. And Grammarly won't catch everything. It'll catch 75% of your mistakes, and you're still gonna have to go through it yourself and make sure the other 25% is cleaned up. But Grammarly is a big time saver in terms of it helps you clean up that 75%. So that's my second tool, is that I use Grammarly a lot. And the third tool that I use.
And to answer your question of how they make money, after flirting with it for almost a decade, for as long as I can remember. Last year, I finally bit the bullet and became a paid subscriber. So 1 out of 2 people in this podcast is a paid subscriber. So if we take that into account, if 50% of their users are paid subscribers, I think they will be making good money.
Wow, I had no idea. So the third tool that I use a lot is Adobe Acrobat Reader. And at first, you might hear Adobe Acrobat Reader. I mean, that helps you read PDFs. Like it's the most common free software on every computer in the world.
I think it's a great tool.
Yeah, and the reason that I use this tool so much, in the free version, I think that's all it does, is it opens the PDF. I mean, you can make edits, but that's if you're on the paid plan. The free plan, I think all it does is it just opens the PDF. The reason that I use this, or the reason I consider this one of my most valuable tools, is that one of the standards that my presentations have to hit is that they have to be completely standalone. The presentation cannot depend on any animations. If there's, in the printout or in the conversion or something like that, if there's a relatively minor color problem, or if there's a font problem or something like that, it cannot ruin the presentation. The presentation has to be completely standalone, because the presentation, you have to be able to print it out and read it in the back of a taxi cab on the way to the airport. That's the standard that the presentation has to hit. And so if you review your work in PowerPoint or some other slide software, it's going to display all the animations and stuff, and all of that's going to be correct. But when you export it and just print it out using Adobe Acrobat Reader, you get this PDF that is in one of the most screwed up versions that it could possibly be. And so you have to ask yourself, is the presentation still going to work under those circumstances? So that's why I use Adobe Acrobat Reader as my third tool, because it helps me run it through that test. And then my rabbit hole, the thing that I waste a lot of time on, is WordPress plugins. I love WordPress plugins, and I've got.
Well, thank God it's not Netflix.
Yeah, I've got. That shows you how much of a geek I am, because my rabbit hole is WordPress plugins. My rabbit hole is not Netflix. That shows you how much of a geek I am. I'll spend hours or days, or God forbid, sometimes even weeks, studying up on all the WordPress plugins that provide a certain functionality. And then a month later, or 2 months later, or 6 months later, or something like that, I'll realize that the functionality that at the time, this functionality, I thought that plugin was the most important thing in the world. I could not survive without that plugin. But a couple months later, I'll be like, why was I looking into this? Because my business, I will have realized that the business line that really needed that plugin was so unprofitable for me that I just ditched it. And so finding the plugin that was going to support that business line, I killed off that business line. I don't care about that plugin anymore. In all of the time, I've been running WordPress websites for about, 5 or 6 years or more now. And I don't think there's even one plugin that I've ever found that was even remotely useful to me a year later. And still, I'm like a moth to the flame. I can't learn my lesson that all of this time that you spend studying up on WordPress plugins, there's a 99.99% chance that all of that time is going to be completely wasted, and you don't need to do it at all. I still can't learn that lesson because I love studying up on WordPress plugins so much.
I will identify with that. My favorite WordPress plugin is the one that actually allows you to disable the, what is it called? The Gutenberg, the writing scheme, or whatever, the page editing stuff. I'll say, I don't know what to call that. I mean, being the old-fashioned dinosaur I am, I just like either writing the code or just using the old style, because that's that's why it's one of my most favorite plugins on WordPress. But I can identify with the idea of spending so much time finding it, tweaking it, and trying to get to the result only 1 year down the road to even not remember the name.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad that I'm not alone in my love of WordPress plugins.
Oh, you're not. You're definitely not alone on that.
Okay, so next week, let's do Alper's version of the 3 things in a rabbit hole. How does that sound?
That sounds great. And I think it will have a lot of commonalities with the themes that we talked about today, including in some of the tools. But yes, let's do that.
Wow, so I can't wait for that. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next week then.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rozanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.